Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Web3 Business Show brought to you by Tokenize. My name is Rob, and we are doing this podcast to help business insiders get inspired and learn from fellow founders and entrepreneurs and experts in the space. Today, my guest is Azem, who is a co-founder at Morph, which is a layer 2 focus on consumer use cases. Welcome, Azem.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to have our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Let's jump right into it. So it's a relatively new project. What made you? How did it start? What made you kick off this project, this layer 2?
You know, honestly, when it comes to layer 2s, there's probably 200 of them at this point, where somewhere between 50 and 75 of them are on mainnet if you go and look at what's happening on L2B. But my prior role at Gitcoin DAO was an interesting one where we had protocols that were for ecosystem development, and we were an org that's given away probably the most grants in the Ethereum ecosystem to date, or one of the top grant givers in the Ethereum ecosystem. And so I was able to chat with a lot of the alt L1s and the L2s in trying to understand what they were doing for grants and what they were doing for ecosystem development as they went about trying to build out their own ecosystems. And in doing so, I was fortunate to put together a really good comprehensive understanding of what I felt like it actually takes to successfully launch a ecosystem from the perspective of something like an L2. And so I was able to look at understanding that there was only really two main pieces in the initial stages that you're really looking for, but you could break it down further into four as a whole. The first one is that you need to have a blockchain that's worth building on. And how do you get a blockchain worth building on? Well, that comes from initial TVL and users and transactions. And we see every blockchain trying to play those games these days is, trying to show potential builders that they're not a ghost chain. And so the way to make the initial part successful is have some sort of strategy for distribution that allows you to get those initial users and TVL and transactions onto your chain. After that, what you're looking to do is advertise to builders that despite them having tons and tons of options, that you are the right place for those builders to come and create whichever applications that they are looking to on your chain. And that could be because of incentives like your grant program. It could be because of the amazing infrastructure that you have, where you're a chain that has Chainlink as an oracle as opposed to others who might not. And then at other times it could be, your transaction speed, it could be your cost per transaction, it could be that you're optimistic versus zero knowledge. There's a variety of things that blockchains will do in order to incentivize these developers to come onto their chain. And from there, it's looking at what it takes to actually make a successful project on these infrastructure providers, which we can talk about now or later. But going back to your original question, I was able to really understand what I felt it would take to be able to create a successful blockchain ecosystem, and joined forces in the sense of coming together with my co-founder on a project that had been getting incubated by an exchange named BitGet. And we came together to discuss what it would look like to spin it out, raise outside capital, but still be able to work with the exchange and any of their subsidiary companies for any of the potential help that we would need in getting things off the ground.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so you guys are incubated by BitGet.
Originally, correct.
Okay. And maybe we can deep dive a little bit on those two things you're mentioning, right? Just to avoid, the ghost chain issue. Maybe let's dive into that first. What is your strategy? What have you learned from, being part of those grants and talking to those layer ones and layer twos?
Candidly, what I saw was a lot of the programs, when you look at the grant side of things, that they're in this position where they have a lot of vanity metrics that have been set up. They have 8 and 9-figure USD amount grants in terms of the overall potential money that they have. But really, it's often one or two people who have no idea how to do capital allocation or an understanding of how ecosystem building works using something like Google Sheets. They're usually extremely overwhelmed. They don't know how to pick which projects should get access to funding. And it's just a sad situation, usually, in that sense, where it's not a strategic use of this large amount of capital that's being allocated to the right builders. They're not well resourced in being able to make that happen. They're not the people who have the background strategically to figure out exactly how they would even want to go about doing that. And so on the grant side, that's what you commonly see. And then other than that, it's something I've written about that should be coming out pretty soon. But basically, blockchains as a whole have become, in my issue, someone that have main character syndrome problems, where traditionally, if you look at technology, the infrastructure provider is the backend provider, it is the behind the scenes person. None of us know really all that much about Amazon Web Services. But if you actually look at the numbers, AWS does monumental amounts of revenue. And the problem is that if a blockchain is the equivalent to something like an AWS provider for builders, where Azure and Google Cloud and AWS are sort of indistinguishable to, or should be indistinguishable to the end user, then why is it that the blockchains are the ones that have the founders that are the biggest celebrities? Why is it that the blockchains are the ones that have the biggest parties at every event? Why are they the ones where everyone is focused on their token prices? Why is it just everything about them screams that they have fallen into this place where they feel like they are the main characters of the entire Web3 industry? And from my perspective, the reason that that's a problem is because it leads us to where we've gotten sort of in this stalemate, where there is no real incentive for builders to build real products at the moment in many ways, because as a builder, you come to a chain, you're going to get support in the form of these grants from someone who's overwhelmed at the job that they're doing. And maybe you get a 25 to 50K grant. But even if you get that, you're not getting the support you need to raise venture capital and go on and launch your token on a centralized exchange. You're sort of then stuck once you've gotten this 25 to 50K. It's not really enough to really successfully launch a company, but it is enough to be able to, get like an MVP done. And so as a builder, you sort of become a mercenary, like a grant mercenary. You go from blockchain foundation to blockchain foundation, trying to get access to the 25 to 50K check, because even if you wanted to, the incentives aren't lined up in a way that you're able to take those next steps of success. And the blockchains feel that sort of their job is done. It almost feels like at times when I look around, is that it's not their fault they've had to be this main character. The main character comes from needing to be in a position where they raised a bunch of money early on, we're able to have the liquidity, we're able to throw the parties, we're able to go to users and say, here's why we're amazing, and here's why you should lock up your TVL with us and make our chain look successful so that builders will want to build with us. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that we can succeed as an ecosystem until individual app builders are the ones that are becoming the superstars more so than the infrastructure providers. And until that happens, I think we stay in this same place we've been in, where we're continuing to ask why even more infrastructure projects keep getting funded instead of consumer applications. And I think that it's a larger conversation of sort of how blockchains that are successful today were able to get here and what they need to do in order to evolve so that we can actually make it to the next stages, where I believe the blockchains will not be the most well-known players within things. It'll actually be the individual builders who are making applications that people are using.
Okay, that is definitely interesting. And how did you guys solve this problem, right? What you're calling the character problem, but also allocation of grants. What is your approach in that?
So in the initial stages, we're fortunate in that between BitGet and BitGet Wallet, we have over 30 million collective users to be able to have for that initial distribution side of things. And we have been chatting with other centralized exchanges who are not looking to launch their own layer twos. And that puts us in a good position to be able to have access to larger amounts of distribution to get the initial pieces of that distribution side solved. And then when it comes to the next stage, which is builders, is we've been talking and thinking a lot about the ways that we're going to be able to provide resources, considering the relationships we have not only with the portfolio of companies that BitGet owns, but also the relationships that we have in the industry as a whole. Because going back to something I was saying earlier is that from my perspective, a successful blockchain will come about where you have a blockchain worth building on. You have builders that then come to that blockchain. Those builders make some sort of initial minimum viable products. Those builders are then connected with venture capital companies in a way that allows them to raise some money. And then finally, when those companies are looking to launch their tokens, they're able to successfully launch on centralized exchanges. And so those four pieces are essentially the main parts needed to create a thriving ecosystem. Because if these builders are able to raise this venture capital and then launch this token, then the initial builder can create liquidity for themselves. In the process, if users are actually using these applications, the blockchain is earning money. The venture funds make money when tokens launch and they get to handle their unlocks over time for the percentage of allocation they have for their investment. And centralized exchanges make money based on trading activity happening on their exchanges. And so from everything we've looked at, we've seen that things have sort of stalled at blockchain builder, and we're looking to add in the venture capital and centralized exchange side to allow a positive flywheel of innovation, hopefully, to occur next.
And how do you ensure that, right? You mentioned that it's actually challenging for a lot of those MVPs to get VC funding. So what do you guys do differently in your whole selection process to ensure that they might get VC backing?
I'd say one of the places where I'm fortunate is having spent time at Gitcoin and having overseen their grants program. We had builder programs essentially where we did grant rounds on a quarterly basis at the time, and they were divided out into verticals of open source software, of Ethereum infrastructure, Web3 climate, Web3 gaming, Web3 social. And so having access to the nodes of builders is something that we've been fortunate with because of those initial relationships, and doing a lot of unscalable things, to be really honest with you. I think that everyone feels that because they spent a bunch of money on a hackathon that they've done everything they can to get access to builders. But I was in Tokyo recently for something called EdCon, and was part of a talk called Ethereum Quorum that happened at United Nations University, and Vitalik attended and Aya from the EF attended, and it was 24 builders or builder groups, giving conversations about some of the things that they're doing. And so for me, it's been about being on the ground, doing the unscalable things in the hopes that we can scale. I think that we need to get 5, 10, 15, 20 of these right, which in the grand scale, getting 20 of these right is a difficult thing to do. But if we get those right, it creates a signaling mechanism within the community that Morph is where you would go to be able to actually get the support that you need to be able to successfully launch your applications.
Okay, so it sounds a lot like also traditional VC early seed funding, that kind of approach where you're really looking at the founders, the people behind the project, to see their capabilities.
Yeah, correct. I think one of the things, and this is the first place I've actually publicly talked about this, but have been having private conversations about this quite a bit, is that with Web 2, there was a centralization of where you needed to be in order to get access to venture funding in many ways, where the majority of venture funding was happening in San Francisco, in New York. There's a handful of cities that you sort of understand. And traditionally builders from around the world have wanted to go spend all of their time in a place like San Francisco, which can eventually lead to some sort of warm introductions that helps them then, secure venture capital. One of the problems we've seen with Web3 venture funding is because everything is decentralized. If you are a builder who does not live or is not fortunate enough to just have relationships, that your access to venture funding, regardless of how good the product that you may be building, is essentially not going to happen. It's inaccessible. Where if you live in Colombia, you live in Argentina, you live in Ghana, you live in Vietnam, there just simply isn't that kind of support. And our belief is that there are a lot of builders in a lot of regions where blockchain is actually a tool that can be used for a variety of things other than just gambling, which is really what it is for at the moment, for the most part, which there's nothing wrong with it being a gambling product. But there are many more things that we all believe blockchains can offer. But here at Morph, we just believe that we have to do a little bit more active work in finding the right builders, because those builders who are doing amazing things that simply just don't have the access to getting some of those additional resources are the ones that we feel, if we put our efforts towards, are going to be able to help give us the best results.
And then specifically, how do you guys? You mentioned, of course, your personal network. So I'm assuming there's some introductions involved, but you also mentioned you are going to some of these DEF CON events. Is that one of the ways for you to connect, let's say, to someone in Vietnam or South America, or is there also an online channel for you guys to utilize?
There's online channels as well. I think the thing is the reality of our ecosystem is that it's still very small. And so some of the people I met at Ethereum Quorum were people like the founders of ETH Vietnam and ETH Taipei and the founder of Build Guild. And so being able to chat with people who are traditionally overlooked and underfunded, not to say those orgs are, but just as a whole, it's being willing to look in those places as opposed to being obsessed with only having the biggest parties at every single event. Like, the builders are there, and it's just about being willing to do the work of actually finding them, of having the conversations, of seeing what are people looking to build, what kind of traction are they seeing, what does the team look like? Because a lot of these people who are able to get access to these small grants, they can build something out, but they can't build out everything that's needed for these small grants. But from what we've seen, it goes back to that sort of unscalable work. We have large online channels set up. We're always chatting with builders. We have set up a small, grant setup the way that sort of everyone does. But we've also been hiring in a way that people understand that it sort of comes with the way we're looking to do things is to be willing to do that initial dirty work. And so, I'm fortunate to say I have an amazing team comprised of many people who understand the ethos of how we're looking to go about getting builders and going about these things.
Yeah, that's very so. About your hiring strategy, what is different about your hiring strategy to maybe some other tools out there?
So I think for us, weirdly enough, I think I'd say it's more based on a vibe of that understanding. It isn't necessarily too much more than that, where we have people who understand that it's not just about throwing the biggest party. It's not just about making the biggest name. It's about actually getting real builders who are looking to build products internationally that can be useful. That while we're paying attention to what's going on in DeFi, it's not only about what's happening in DeFi, where we're interested in whatever it may be, from music to gaming to social to search engines, rewards, and actually trying to talk to the builders that are doing that, sort of seeing as we have conversations. Because again, not that there's anything wrong with it, but there are a lot of people in this space who are primarily looking at being able to launch the next DeFi application. And while we do believe that DeFi is in many ways the backbone of what's going to happen on these blockchains, the way that we end up being able to get the next generation individual who's building or using other kinds of products, it won't simply be for finance purposes. And so using, again, like the networks we have, I think it allows us to bring more people to the table who feel that way. An example would be one of our main DevRel people. She's someone who's based out of Buenos Aires in Argentina. She has said publicly now a few times, she dropped out of school at 17. She's 21 now and has been quite successful with us and has been an amazing DevRel. But it's also that her life experiences are very different than just hiring someone who has lived their entire lives in the United States or Berlin or the UK and don't understand the use cases as well for blockchain. She's from a country that has faced hyperinflation, and so her perspective on what's possible and what should be built using blockchains is very different than the average Westerner. And sort of what I mean in terms of the vibe and the kinds of people that she brings to the table that she thinks also offer forms of credibility or understanding works differently this way. And so we've been doing our best to be quite intentional about that.
Okay, so you also have a truly decentralized team working with people basically all over the world, including South America, Asia, Africa as well?
Correct. One of our DevRels is based out of Nigeria at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, that's a quite interesting thing about blockchain. That's indeed, it's popping up everywhere in all of those places, not just in San Francisco and New York.
100%.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Azem. The last question from my side is one that I ask all of our guests, which is, if you have any advice for fellow founders, either building on layer 2 application layer or building a blockchain itself like you're doing, what would that be?
Ooh, that's a good one, because I think it's actually tough to give the kinds of overarching advice. Candidly, I would say understand incentive alignment. I think that one of the biggest things that is misunderstood from builders who are looking to, let's say, raise venture capital is that VCs are not there to help build the blockchain ecosystem. VCs are there to make money for their LPs by way of blockchain ecosystems. And so they will do what will earn them the most money. And it's why they're criticized for investing in infrastructure projects these days. But those are more surefire ways to earn money for their LPs. And so I would tell builders who are looking to succeed to understand the incentives of those involved that they're looking to talk to so that they can better speak to them. Because if you can say, I understand that you're looking to make money to a VC, and then you can explain to them how the thing that you're building can help earn them money for their LPs, then you're in a much better position of being able to get access to venture capital than if you sell them the dreams of what is possible and the amazing things that will come with. The VCs are interested in those things, but they're most of the time first interested in how those things are going to generate money.
Okay, that's excellent. I think you are probably the second person having similar advice as this one, so that's good to hear. Good to have that confirmed. Thank you so much, Azem. Thank you everybody for listening, watching, and see you next time. Bye.
Take care, everyone.